What if I told you that Aston Martin could be racing a car that shouldn't even be on the track, and that the FIA already knows it? Because what seemed like a simple engine problem after China has uncovered something much more serious. An AMR26 at the limit, not only of performance but of structural integrity. The big question is, to what extent is Aston Martin in real danger? And what has the FIA discovered that changes absolutely everything? The Chinese Grand Prix wasn't just another race on the calendar. It was the exact moment when everything started to fall apart for Aston Martin. Because up to that point, the discourse was clear. The problem was in the Honda engine, in its performance, in its reliability, in that deficit that had already been dragging on since pre-season. But what happened in Shanghai completely changed the narrative and exposed a much darker reality. From the first kilometers of the weekend, the AMR26 began to show strange behavior, but not in curves, not in braking, on a straight line. At extreme speeds, the car generated completely unusual vibrations, something that not only affected the driver's performance, but also began to raise much more serious doubts within the paddock. It was not a simple discomfort, it was a sign that something structural was not working as it should. And this is where everything escalates. Because these vibrations were not an isolated engine problem, nor a simple adjustment issue. What began to be suspected and subsequently analyzed is that the origin was in the complete interaction of the system. The power unit, the battery, the gearbox, and the chassis itself working together, or rather uncoordinated. The AMR26, designed under an extremely aggressive and compact concept, sought to maximize every millimeter of performance. But that same approach has ended up becoming its greatest weakness. By integrating all the components so tightly, any anomaly, no matter how small, is amplified within the whole. And that is exactly what is happening. The engine generates vibrations, the structure does not absorb them properly, and the result is an unstable car even in a straight line. The most worrying thing is that this did not remain simple internal comments. Rival teams began to talk openly about a car that was on the verge of structural failure at more than 320 kilometers per hour. A very harsh statement, but one that perfectly reflects the level of concern that has been generated around Aston Martin. And while all this was happening on the track, the FIA began to look further afield. Because when a car exhibits this type of behavior, it is no longer just a question of performance. It is a question of safety. That's why the investigation changed focus. It stopped focusing solely on Honda's hybrid system and began to analyze the entire car package. This is the critical point. Because in Formula 1 you can have a weak engine, you can have aerodynamic problems, but when the problem is the entire concept of the car, when everything is connected and fails at the same time, we no longer talk about evolution, we talk about crisis. Aston Martin left China not only with bad results, but with a much more dangerous mystery. They do not know exactly what is wrong, nor to what extent they can solve it without completely redesigning the car. Directly unsustainable for Aston Martin. Because now we no longer talk only about what happens on the track, but about the real consequences that this is having within the team, and about something even more serious, the impossibility of reacting. The biggest problem with the AMR26 is not only that it fails, it is that it does not allow us to understand why it fails. And this, in Formula 1, is the worst possible scenario. Since the pre-season tests, Aston Martin has been one of the teams with the lowest mileage, accumulating practically lost days where they could barely complete a few laps before critical failures appeared. This is not a minor detail, it is a collapse in the basis of development. Because without turns there is no data. And without data there is no evolution. The team is trapped in a very dangerous loop. The car has problems but they can't drive long enough to understand them, and by not understanding them they can't solve them. While the rest of the teams evolve, Aston Martin is completely blocked, unable to correlate what it sees in the wind tunnel with what is really happening on the track. And this is where another key factor comes in, the extreme design of the car. The AMR26 is not a conventional single-seater. It is a radical bet, extremely compact, where everything is packed to the limit. This, which in theory was supposed to give an aerodynamic advantage, has become a technical trap. Because any change they try to make affects multiple areas at the same time. They cannot touch the engine without disturbing the cooling. They cannot adjust the structure without affecting the gearbox. They cannot correct vibrations without compromising performance. Everything is connected, and everything fails together. Furthermore, the problems are not limited to a single area. We are talking about a cocktail of failures. Performance deficit in the power unit, constant reliability problems, structural vibrations, battery failures, and an integration so aggressive that it does not allow room for maneuver. This is not a one-time weakness, it is a complete technical collapse. And while Aston Martin tries to find answers, time is against them. Because every weekend lost is not only a bad result, it's one less opportunity to develop the car. And in such a tight season, falling behind in the first races can be a final sentence. But the most alarming thing of all is that the problem is no longer just within the team. Now it is under the radar of the FIA. And when the FIA comes into play, it's no longer about improvement. It's about proving that your car is safe and legal. Aston Martin is no longer just fighting against its own mistakes. It is fighting against the clock, against the complexity of its own design, and against an investigation that could completely change its season. But there is an even deeper point that almost no one is analyzing, and it is what really defines the magnitude of Aston Martin's problem, the medium and long-term consequences. Because what is happening with the AMR26 does not end in China, nor in the next races. This can completely condition the team's project in the coming years. And this is where the situation becomes even more critical. In Formula One, each season is not an isolated cycle. It is a chain of continuous development. And when a team is forced to slow down, rethink, or even redesign its base concept, all future work is compromised. Aston Martin is not only losing performance now, it is mortgaging its evolution. The problem is that this car had to be the basis on which to build the future, especially at a key stage where the team had bet heavily on a new technical philosophy. But if that foundation is wrong, everything that comes after will be too. And here comes a silent but devastating factor, the opportunity cost. While Aston Martin invests resources in trying to understand and correct a car that doesn't work, the rest of the teams are moving forward. They are developing, optimizing, finding tenets, while they are still stuck on fundamental problems. This creates a gap that is not only difficult to close. In many cases it becomes irreversible within the same season. In addition, there is another critical point that cannot be ignored: decision-making. When a team goes into crisis, every decision becomes riskier. Are you still developing this concept? Do they partially abandon it? Are you starting to think about the next car, sacrificing this year? Either of these options has huge consequences, and choosing wrong can make the situation even worse. And the most worrying thing is that there is no clear solution. Because if the problem was the engine, you would change the engine. If it was aerodynamic, you'd bring a new package. But when the problem is the total integration of the car, there is no quick solution. Aston Martin is at a point where it needs time, but Formula One doesn't give you time. And while all this is happening, the external pressure continues to grow. The FIA watching, rivals pointing, the paddock talking, and within the team, the urgent need to show that they can reverse a situation that, right now, seems out of control. This is the real danger. It's not just a car that doesn't work, it's a project that can run out of direction. Because the reality is that the team has crossed a very dangerous line. It no longer controls its own destiny. The FIA investigation has completely changed the rules of the game, and Aston Martin is now in a position where it is not enough to improve, it has to justify that its car is viable. The key is that when the FIA detects possible structural or safety problems, the consequences can be extreme. We are not talking about a simple technical directive or limiting a motor map. We are talking about scenarios where the car could be restricted, urgently modified, or even removed if it does not meet the standards. And this puts Aston Martin in a critical situation, because any profound change to the AMR26 practically implies redoing the concept of the car. But doing it in the middle of the season is almost impossible. There is no time, there is no room in the budget limit, and most importantly, there are no guarantees that it will work. Here is the real dilemma. Continue with a potentially unstable car, or completely break the development of the season. Because if they try to fix it, they could waste months on a redesign that leaves them out of the fight. But if they don't, they run the risk of the FIA intervening directly. It's a perfect trap. And while all this is happening, there is another silent but equally important factor: the internal impact. A project like this not only affects performance on the track, it affects trust within the team. Engineers who can't find answers, drivers who don't trust the car, decisions that start to become reactive instead of strategic. Aston Martin isn't just losing performance, it's losing direction. What started as an ambitious bet with a radical design now threatens to become one of the biggest recent technical failures. Because when a car fails at its base, there is no patch that will fix it. And the big question that remains in the air is the most dangerous of all. Is Aston Martin facing a simple difficult start? Or are we seeing the total collapse of its project by 2026? Whenever you want, I recommend expanding the first block to further reinforce the initial retention with more tension and context. And after everything we have seen, the conclusion is as clear as it is worrying. Aston Martin is not going through a bad streak. It is facing a structural crisis that puts its entire project in doubt. Because when a team reaches the point where the FIA stops looking at a specific part and starts analyzing the entire car, it means that the problem is no longer isolated technical. It is conceptual. The AMR26 is not failing in a specific area, it is failing as a system, and that is the most difficult thing to correct in Formula One. What should have been a masterpiece of engineering, a compact, aggressive car on the limit, has become a double-edged sword. Every extreme decision in its design now works against it, generating a domino effect that affects performance, reliability, development, and most seriously, safety. And here's the key point. Aston Martin no longer competes just against other teams, it competes against its own car. Because while the rest evolve, they continue trying to understand what is happening. While others optimize tenths, they struggle to complete laps. And meanwhile, the FIA watches, and that completely changes the pressure on the team. The season is still long, but in modern Formula One, losing control at the start can mean losing the entire year. And Aston Martin is at that limit, at that point where each decision can define whether they manage to save the project, or if this AMR26 goes down in history as a failed concept. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.